After over a year of analyzing Dollhouse, making a case for it being feminist against a massive horde of feminists screaming about it being the worst thing ever, I've finally come to the conclusion of my Dollhouse is Feminist series. Now that I'm here, the thing that stands out most to me is supreme annoyance. I identify as a feminist, and performing feminist analysis is one of my favorite pastimes. So understand where I'm coming from when I say that feminists can annoy the hell out of me. It's like the hostility and resistance to change that can be found in fan communities. It's the same stupid tribalism, something innate to humanity, which makes me at times hate the subculture that I would generally consider my people. While I liked analyzing Dollhouse, as I feel that's something that needed to be done anyway, I hate that I spent the whole time arguing against my people. Dollhouse, like any show, has its flaws, but it's got a generally feminist message that makes it better than a great deal of media out there. Why are there so many feminists eager to call it the worst thing ever? Well, Joss was misquoted. He said he wasn't writing Dollhouse as a feminist screed.
Having come out publicly as a professed feminist and a professed, humanist, everybody is judging what I do by that. And I just read today an article in, I think, the Washington Post that said fans are calling Dollhouse a feminist screed, but we're not seeing it. Well, I'm not seeing it either because it's not. It's a work of fiction that I am creating. And if you start doing that, if you start using your drama for didacticism just to make a point, you're not making drama, you're speech writing. And people will smell it, and they will walk away, because it is not the human condition to be told what to do. It's the human condition to try to figure it out. And that's what the characters should be going through.
And then a fan paraphrased him as saying Dollhouse is not a feminist show.
You just said Dollhouse is not a feminist show.
And then IO9 reported this as Whedon explained that Dollhouse is not a feminist show. Tons of feminists then spread the rumor that Joss is now writing anti-feminism, and he intended Dollhouse to be anti-feminist. I can understand with that priming, it would be easy to interpret Dollhouse as anti-feminist. Now, however, Joss explicitly says that Dollhouse has a feminist message.
Hopefully, people can take feminist ideals away from this. The idea was very simply, this woman doesn't exist. She literally doesn't exist, and she builds herself from scratch. To me, that is the most powerful act that a person can do.
But people treat the situation as a proof that Joss is a bad feminist, because he thinks Dollhouse is feminist, as if Dollhouse has an anti-feminist value that is apart from creator intent. It gets weirder when you consider the way Dollhouse frequently gets compared to Henrik Ibsen's play A Doll's House. Before the series came out, feminists noted the title similarities and wondered if Joss was doing something similar, or even if he was doing a deliberate allusion to what is often considered a classic piece of feminist literature. What is A Doll's House? It's a story about a woman named Nora who, over the course of the play, realizes that her husband Torvald sees her as an object. Just a doll. And so does Torvald's associate Krogstad, and so did her father. All the men in her life treated her as a doll, a plaything. Upon this realization, she decides to seek freedom, and she walks out on her husband. I wrote a paper on A Doll's House, in which I labeled it as a feminist work despite the author having stated that he didn't consider it feminist so much as a humanist story about liberation in general. I presumed that the creator just didn't understand feminism, and yet he had created a feminist work, and it should be described as a feminist work. Even though I think the title similarity is a complete coincidence, the two stories have similar themes of men dehumanizing and objectifying women, who then seek liberation from this patriarchal oppression. No matter what the creator says, I think we should agree that any story that has that as a primary theme should be considered a feminist work. However, once Dollhouse came out, feminists started freaking out and saying that it disappointingly has nothing to do with A Doll's House. And I don't get how that works. Maybe they just never read A Doll's House. So why is Dollhouse so objectionable? Well, some feminists have said that it's because women are objectified within the narrative. However, women are objectified in a lot of works considered feminist because they depict that as a bad thing. A Doll's House is well regarded for that. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is often considered a powerful feminist work for depicting the extremes of misogyny. Dollhouse also derives a lot of inspiration from the Stepford Wives, which also has a lot of stupid feminists saying that the depiction of a woman fighting against patriarchy and the objectification of women is somehow sexist. But at least that one also has a good deal of recognition as a feminist work to counteract the negativity. Before me, no online feminist said anything good about Dollhouse. At least not so it was accessible by a Google search for Dollhouse Feminist. Some feminists claim that Dollhouse specifically is sexist because Joss puts women in active fighting positions, which they phrase like, Joss likes seeing women get beat up, and he wants you to like it too. With that kind of phrasing, it's easy to get riled up, but it's completely deceptive. It's not about beating up women, it's about respecting women enough to let them take the traditional roles of men, which is a major point of second-wave feminism, and we're in the third wave. Shouldn't we be past that? Getting angry over that is bizarrely conservative, like they want things to go back before the days of Rosie the Riveter. Who went back in time, grabbed the first wavers, brought them to the future, and gave them internet access? It still doesn't add up, though. Even if there are really conservative feminists who see women being placed in active fighting roles as violence against women, why aren't they focusing their anger against the feminists who are trying to get women in active fighting roles in the military and law enforcement? Why are they yelling about Dollhouse when women are allowed to be soldiers and cops? Dollhouse should be just one on the list of many shows featuring women in combat roles. You shouldn't expect to see these ultra-conservative feminists being the main opposition to Dollhouse. And you would think that they'd yell in the same breath about Castle starring a female cop, thus putting her in the way of being beat up by evil men. I think it's just an excuse to hate Dollhouse. Some feminists say that Dollhouse is sexist because it doesn't depict the Rossum Corporation as evil. Somehow they miss Paul Ballard, a rather standard hero character, going after the Dollhouse as a sex trafficking operation. Even in the Dollhouse, Boyd seems uncomfortable with everything, and Claire does her best to look out for the actives when so few even care. And they both have a negative view of Mr. Apathy. Echo has her arc of trying to regain her intelligence and gain her freedom. Season 1, Episode 3, Stage Fright has the Freedom song play over the ending, where Echo indicates that Sierra should hide her intelligence. Season 1, Episode 5, True Believer compares the Dollhouse to a cult. Season 1, Episode 6, Man on the Street has interviews with people saying pretty much all the objections feminists have with the institution. Season 1, Episode 7, Echoes has Caroline actually saying Rossum is evil twice. You'd think that would convince people that Rossum was, evil, but it still didn't sink in. I get that people would start watching Dollhouse expecting something as shallow as Falling Skies, where the good guys and the bad guys are clearly defined and there's no real ambiguity, even with the presence of some under mind control. I get that some people would watch the show without catching on to the idea that characters that are likable do not always wear white hats. It is reasonable to presume that some of this demographic would also overlap with the feminist one. But it doesn't make sense that so many wouldn't get that this was a show for adults, with realistic moral ambiguity, where decent people do bad things, bad people do good things, and some just muddle through life aimlessly. The movie Enemy of the State manages to depict reasonably decent people doing bad things because they work for bad people, while simultaneously being both fun to watch and disturbing because their actions are immoral. The idea of that kind of complexity is not a new concept. Some feminists talk about Dollhouse depicting bad things happening to women as if it's just for some sadistic fantasy. I think they don't realize that empathy isn't exclusive to feminists, and that storytellers will depict bad things happening to protagonists to create a sense of investment so that the audience will care about the outcome. These feminists seem to think that they're the only ones who feel anything for people, so whenever something bad happens to a character, it must be an act of hate, and any fan of the story must revel in the hatred. This is silly, but because they speak out against Dollhouse, their opinions are accepted across the general anti-Dollhouse community, which adds to the appearance of some massive feminist united front against Dollhouse. So what's the real reason? I think it has to be the sex. Dollhouse doesn't just depict sex, it is more or less about sex, and it places the viewer in a position to objectify the characters. While I consider that one of the flaws of the show, Joss and Eliza were trying to make a point with it, and I'm able to compartmentalize and focus on other things. I don't think the antis can really get past it, though. This is just speculation, but I wonder if this hatred comes from some projection, from embarrassment about personal sexual attraction. Though it's a stereotype, there are a number of lesbians in the feminist demographic. A lot of people attracted to women find Eliza Dushku very attractive. When she's as oversaturated as she is in Dollhouse, I can imagine that turns into ultra hot. Maybe lesbian feminists find themselves incredibly aroused by Echo and can't help be turned on by the scenes in which she's abused, especially if her performance somehow contributes to her attractiveness, such as through making poses not normally seen. This could cause an internal conflict. They don't want to find anything appealing about the abuse, yet there's an involuntary response of sexual arousal. They don't want to hate themselves, so they project their disgust and hatred onto the people responsible for putting that on television. It's not rational, and everything they say against Dollhouse is just a way to justify these irrational feelings. In addition to that pet theory, I think a big reason feminists get so angry about Dollhouse is an irrational dislike of Joss Whedon, pretty much just because he's a man. That tribalistic mindset creates these distinctions between the us and the them. And that leads to some feminists thinking that only women should be deserving of respect for being feminists. They hate that Joss has become well respected by the feminist community and seek any opportunity to tear him down and make everyone else hate him too. Again, it's like those petty fandom upsets, like the Halo series being run by 343i now and not Bungie. It's entirely stupid, but people get so completely enraged and do their darndest to make everyone miserable over it. The things that feminists draw up to justify their hatred of Dollhouse aren't really exclusive to Dollhouse or miss the point entirely. One feminist went on a rant about how the female actives get weird names like Sierra and Echo, while the male ones get traditional male names like Victor and Mike. When someone then pointed out that it's derived from the phonetic alphabet, she just said that Dollhouse is sexist for failing to do something transgressive with gender, like calling Eliza's character Victor. Something that you would never see on any show and is ridiculous to get angry about over its absence. It's like Dollhouse specifically gets blamed for standards of contemporary media. Compared to most contemporary media, Dollhouse is incredibly progressive. It does interesting things with gender identity and gender roles, has strong women, strong men, weak men, and it makes us think about characters more on a basic human level. Morally ambiguous things are portrayed as ambiguous, with both good sides and bad sides receiving attention. Truly creepy characters are portrayed negatively. It's like they can't see the forest for the hate of the park ranger. I'm not even sure how much creative control Joss had. He said that he was pretty much at the mercy of Fox executives, who distorted the show a great deal. I have a relative who is a producer of a sci-fi TV show, and he said that anything a higher-up presents as an optional change is not really optional. So I'm thinking Joss couldn't really fight them on things, and anything he did fight them on would be exceptional. Within the show production, he was a producer, and so was Eliza Dushku. He said that Shauna Tripsick was responsible for all those sexy outfits, that he didn't know about them until he saw them. He's also said that Eliza wanted to use the Dollhouse show to show off her body, so maybe she had some influence there. Half of the writing staff were women, including Elizabeth Kraft and Sarah Fain, who Joss said he made showrunners of Dollhouse, because the show's subject needed to be dealt with by women. That makes me think that Joss had very little control, and you only hear so much from him on the show because that's one of his jobs. Like how you always hear about Halo news from Frank O'Connor. In fact, Joss Whedon fans tend to blame Dollhouse's storytelling problems on the fact that he didn't have as much involvement as he did with Buffy and Firefly. They also recognize that mostly women were in control and tend to take their criticism to misogynistic places. It would be logical if feminists were to recognize women had control and praise the show for it, recognizing that it's hard to make a TV show out of such a strange concept and forgiving the missteps. But instead it's all about how Joss is evil, and the show is proof he hates women. Really, it's misjossiny. Irrational hate of Joss Whedon and his works, deriving from misandry and tribalism. Misjossinists will look at anything he's involved with while having the preconceived notion that it's evidence of his evil, and then they'll watch it specifically looking for the things that they can use to show their fellow feminists that Joss really is evil and never was a feminist. That's the only way I can rationalize so many feminists deciding that something I personally thought was a preachy feminist screed is anti-feminist. Even though I'm now aware Joss didn't write Dollhouse as a feminist screed, at the time I totally thought it was, as the show seemed like a heavy-handed story with a moral. It seemed like Joss had gotten angry with society and decided to shove a feminist message down all of our throats. I was talking to my mom about how Dollhouse annoyed me because instead of simply being feminist with a few strong women, it had to be this rant about how women are objectified by patriarchy and how horrible prostitution is, and women defeating male oppressors every week on the road to liberation. Even though I agreed with it, it was annoying how overt it was. Every week was the same stinking moral shouted at the top of Joss Whedon's lungs. Patriarchy bad, feminism good, just smash patriarchy.
Puny God.
Online feminists are just so stupid about the show because of their misjossiny. A lot of them dismiss all of what I have to say because I'm clearly just an obsessed fan. It couldn't be that I'm both a fan and have some intelligent feminist criticism to make. I'm not even a big Dollhouse fan. I think that there are some intriguing concepts building on previous works like The Stepford Wives, The Manchurian Candidate, and Total Recall, but I'd frankly rather watch them than Dollhouse. I've somewhat been viewing this video series as a chore, something that I just need to do to make a stand against rampant stupidity threatening to erase a feminist story from the public consciousness. It's a story about liberation from slavery, a condemnation of sex trafficking, a show that says that few people are innately evil and that good people can wind up doing bad things because of how a problematic infrastructure programs them. A woman at the very bottom, who had everything taken from her, is able to rebuild herself out of a desire to save everyone.
Freedom is all we need to
soul.